Russia made a mistake it has made before and somehow keeps making again. Facing mounting losses on the southern front, Russian commanders funneled fresh fighter jets into occupied Crimea, reinforcements meant to rebuild a strike force that had been bleeding aircraft for months. They flew them into hardened shelters, concrete reinforced hangars designed specifically to survive exactly the kind of attack Ukraine had been launching against this peninsula for years. Ukraine didn't strike immediately. It waited. It watched the reinforcements arrive, watched them get tucked safely into their shelters, watched Russian commanders check the box marked "Problem solved." Then, in the middle of the night, Ukraine hit almost all of them at once. This is the story of how a modern intelligence-driven drone campaign turned one of Russia's most fortified air bases in Crimea into a scrapyard twice in a single week. The target was Saky Airbase, on the western coast of Crimea, near the town of Hvardiiske, just over 60 kilometers from Simferopol. This isn't some obscure outpost sitting quietly on the map. Saky is home to Russian naval aviation's frontline strike aircraft, a base that has launched missile and bombing runs against Ukrainian territory throughout the war, supporting Russian ground operations along the southern front from the safety of what was supposed to be secure, rear area territory. The base already carries a notorious history. Back in August 2022, a mysterious series of explosions tore through Saky and destroyed roughly 9 Russian aircraft on the flight line in a single day. An incident widely attributed to Ukrainian special operations, even though Kyiv never officially claimed responsibility for it at the time. It remains one of the most spectacular single-event losses of Russian air power recorded in the entire war. Since then, Russia has adapted. Instead of leaving valuable jets exposed on open tarmac where a single strike could take out an entire row of aircraft at once, commanders moved them into hardened aircraft shelters, reinforced concrete bunkers built specifically to survive drone strikes, shrapnel, and near-miss blasts. On paper, it solved the problem completely. Move the aircraft behind concrete and steel, and the vulnerability that cost Russia so dearly in 2022 simply disappears. In practice, it just meant Ukraine had to get better at hitting a harder target, and it did. This time, the operation came as part of what Ukraine's security service publicly described as a 40-day campaign of sustained pressure on Russia, personally directed by President Volodymyr Zelensky, aimed squarely at grinding down Russian military capacity piece by piece rather than chasing one dramatic headline strike. It's a different philosophy of warfare, not one big spectacular hit for the cameras, but a sustained, methodical campaign designed to bleed an opponent's capability day after day until the damage becomes impossible to ignore or replace. And it worked. Ukrainian drones scored confirmed hits on 7 separate hangars at Saky hangars that were sheltering Su-30SM and Su-30 multi-role fighters, along with Su-24 frontline bombers, the exact reinforcements Russia had just moved onto the peninsula. Early reporting confirmed that at least 2 of the targeted hangars had aircraft inside at the moment of impact, and after the strike, a fire broke out in the hangar housing a Su-30SM, the clearest possible sign that the hit had actually connected with the aircraft itself. Satellite imagery released in the aftermath backs this up in stark, unmistakable detail. Photos show visible damage to the hardened shelters themselves, heavy doors blown completely off several of them, structural damage consistent with a direct strike rather than a near miss or a stray hit somewhere nearby. Out of 7 hardened shelters analyzed by open-source imagery, 6 showed clear, confirmed damage. For a defense built specifically to make this kind of loss impossible, that's about as close to total failure as it gets. Here's what makes this operation different from a typical one-off strike. Ukraine didn't stop after the first hit. Days later, the same base was struck again, the second attack on Saky in a single week. This wasn't opportunism, and it wasn't luck. This was Ukraine's forces methodically working through the base's aircraft inventory, hangar by hangar, treating the airfield less like a single target to be hit once and forgotten, and more like a list to be checked off one item at a time. That repetition matters more than it might seem at first. A single strike, however damaging, can be written off by Russian commanders as bad luck or a one-time intelligence leak. A second strike, on the exact same base, in the exact same week, tells a very different story. It tells Russian planners that Ukraine has real-time visibility into what's happening on that airfield, knows which hangars matter, and can come back whenever it wants. That's a far more dangerous message than the damage from either individual strike on its own. The same coordinated operation also hit a second base, Hvardiiske, near Simferopol, in central Crimea, where drones struck hangars, storing Shahed-type attack drones and aviation equipment rather than manned fighters. Two bases hit in the same window, each serving a different but connected purpose in Russia's ability to project air power and strike power from the peninsula. Taking down manned fighters and unmanned strike assets in the same operation isn't a coincidence. It's a deliberate attempt to degrade both ends of Russia's aerial strike capability at once, leaving fewer options no matter which type of aircraft Russian commanders reach for next. Let's talk numbers for a moment, because they matter. Each Su-30SM in that hangar carries an estimated price tag between $30 and $50 million. It's Russia's most capable multi-role fighter operating in the theater, a heavily upgraded, twin-seat, twin-engine aircraft equipped with a sophisticated passive electronically scanned array radar and long-range air-to-air missiles, giving it both an air superiority and a ground attack role in a single airframe. It carries a combat radius of roughly 1,500 kilometers unrefueled, more than enough range to strike targets deep into Ukrainian territory directly from a Crimean runway without ever needing to refuel mid-mission. That's exactly why Russia needed reinforcements there in the first place, and exactly why losing them again inside shelters that were supposed to make them untouchable is such a heavy blow. You don't just lose a jet when a strike like this lands. You lose a piece of the exact capability the reinforcement flight was sent to rebuild in the first place, meaning Russian planners are effectively back to square one, except now with fewer available airframes and a rapidly shrinking sense of where on the peninsula is actually safe to park them. There's a broader pattern underneath all of this that's easy to miss if you only look at Saky in isolation. For years now, Ukraine has been steadily draining Russia's presence in Crimea through exactly this kind of asymmetric pressure, hitting the bridges connecting the peninsula to the mainland, hitting fuel depots and refineries, hitting naval assets until Russia's Black Sea fleet largely abandoned its most exposed anchorages in favor of safer, more distant ports. The fuel situation on the peninsula has reportedly gotten bad enough that local authorities have had to consider rationing a strain compounding right at the height of the local summer tourist season, adding civilian friction on top of a growing military problem, and creating exactly the kind of pressure that makes an already difficult occupation even harder to sustain. Every strike like this one adds to that pressure. It's not designed to win the war in a single night. It's designed to make Crimea an increasingly expensive, increasingly unstable place for Russia to keep its most valuable aircraft until eventually there's nowhere left on the peninsula that actually qualifies as safe, hardened shelter or not. And Russian planners know it. Reports have emerged of Russian military exercises specifically wargaming a hypothetical Ukrainian amphibious landing on Crimea, a scenario most analysts still consider extremely unlikely given the logistics involved. But the fact that Russian command is rehearsing for it at all tells you how seriously they're taking the erosion of control over a peninsula they annexed over a decade ago and have spent years trying to convince the world and themselves is permanently secure. It isn't. Not from the air, not from the sea, and as this strike just proved once again, not even inside a hardened concrete shelter built specifically to make sure it would be. If you want to see exactly how far this campaign of pressure on Crimea goes next, stay with us because Ukraine has made it clear this was only one operation inside a much longer campaign, and there's more coming. Step back for a second and look at what actually happened here, because the details matter more than the headline. Russia didn't just leave aircraft sitting exposed on a runway and get caught off guard by a lucky strike. They saw the threat coming, they understood the risk, and they built exactly the defense that was supposed to solve it. Concrete shelters, hardened doors, reinforced walls designed to absorb blasts and shrapnel that would have shredded an aircraft left out in the open. On paper, that's the correct response to years of Ukrainian pressure. In practice, it bought them one round, maybe two, before Ukraine adapted its targeting and punched through anyway. That's the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath this entire story. Hardened shelters aren't magic. They're not force fields. They buy time, and they raise the cost of an attack. But they don't remove the vulnerability entirely, they just change what kind of strike it takes to expose it. And Ukraine, after years of hitting this exact base, has clearly built the intelligence picture and the precision capability needed to keep closing that gap every time Russia tries to widen it. Think about the sequence of events one more time, because it's worth repeating. Russia loses aircraft at Saky in 2022. Russia adapts by building hardened shelters. Russia rebuilds its strike capability and moves fresh reinforcements into those shelters, believing the lesson has been learned and the problem solved. Ukraine waits, watches, confirms the aircraft are inside, and then hits the same hangars anyway, not once, but twice in a single week. Every single step Russia took to fix the problem became another data point Ukraine used to solve the next version of it. That's what a real intelligence-driven air campaign looks like in this war. It isn't about flying in and hoping something valuable happens to be sitting there. It's about watching, waiting, confirming a target is inside a specific structure at a specific moment, and then executing with enough precision that the strike doesn't just damage a building, it destroys the exact asset that building was built to protect. And this is happening against the backdrop of a peninsula that's already under sustained, multi-front pressure. The bridges connecting Crimea to the Russian mainland have been repeatedly targeted throughout the war. Fuel infrastructure has been hit hard enough that ordinary residents are reportedly facing shortages during peak tourist season. The Black Sea Fleet has already been pushed out of its most exposed anchorages entirely. Now add repeated, methodical strikes on the airbases meant to project Russian air power from the peninsula, and you start to see the real shape of what's happening here. Not a single dramatic battle, but a slow, sustained campaign designed to make an entire occupied territory progressively harder, costlier, and more dangerous for Russia to hold on to. Whether that pressure ever produces a dramatic outcome, a full withdrawal, a negotiated settlement, a shift in the wider war, is impossible to say from any single strike. But it's clear that Ukraine isn't treating Crimea as untouchable anymore, and it's equally clear that Russia's confidence in its own defenses there has been shaken by exactly the kind of repeated failure this operation represents. When you build a shelter specifically to prevent a repeat of your worst loss of the war, and the enemy finds a way through it anyway, twice, in the same week, that's not a minor tactical setback. That's a strategic problem with no easy fix in sight. So here's the real question this leaves hanging over the rest of the war. If hardened concrete shelters, built specifically to solve this exact problem, still aren't enough to keep Russia's most valuable aircraft safe, what is? Right now, nobody on the Russian side seems to have an answer, and every week that passes without one is another week Ukraine's drones get to keep asking the question. If you want to keep tracking exactly how this pressure campaign on Crimea unfolds, every base hit, every jet destroyed, every shelter that turns out not to be as hardened as Russia hoped, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications, because Ukraine has already made clear this operation was only one chapter in a much longer campaign, and we'll be covering every strike as it happens.